Hello, and welcome to the Creative Adventure Podcast, an artist's guide to modern freelancing. Welcome to the Tavern today. Put down your sword, put down your axe, close your laptop, shut down your iPad, turn off ZBrush, turn off Photoshop, whatever you use to make your art, and join me in the tavern enjoying some stew at the bar top. We just finished a long day of freelancing to get some coin to support our freelance lifestyle. And while we are enjoying our stew, a hooded figure approaches us from the side. She says to you, "Well met, my armed and dangerous friend. Can I buy you a drink?" And this seductive voice does pique your interest, obviously. And with that, you take a quick glance over to get a better look of this figure, and something catches you off guard. You see a very deep red, almost black stain around her lips. It's not quite lipstick. You also catch the glimpse of a fang when she grins at you. This might not be the right kind of person you want to interact with. You're getting some gut instincts that this figure, while she does prod you, she does compliment you on your armor, how well you keep it, on your ability to carry yourself as a freelancer, but you're getting the vibe that this person, this perhaps creature, may not be best suited for you for obvious reasons, such as the fang or the deep red stain around her lips. So, now it is for you to choose. Do you begin to prod this character and figure out what they really want? Do you engage with them, or do you depart because there's some potential red flags at the beginning that might make this interaction, this relationship, not good for you in the long run? So, with all of that, in today's episode, we're going to talk about some client red flags for freelancers in the modern age. What are some things to look out for so then when you are finding some of your next freelance work, you can enter it with confidence that you guys are going to work well together. So, without further ado, let's talk about freelancing in the modern age and finding some client red flags to hopefully help you with your freelancing journey. So when it comes to finding clients in general, whether you're a freelance artist or you're maybe a staff artist, maybe thinking about dabbling or just doing a little bit of extra work for other people on the side, finding the right people to do some work for is very much like finding a romantic relationship where there's going to be things that you need to look out for as far as communication, as far as energy exchanged, as far as expectations. There's a lot of things that go into finding good clients. Now, obviously with the story we shared just a moment ago with, really it's just a vampire, the clients typically don't approach you in that way. I mean, maybe a handful are extremely predatory, but most of the time when people are overly forward, as in, "Can I buy you a drink?" or they slide into your DMs and they say, "Hey, I have free work," that might end up being a scam. So I hope you do know that people and clients who potentially approach you cold saying, "I'm going to offer you money out of the gate," that's a scam. So just FYI. But there are things that you do need to look out for when you may be searching to find your next gig, find your next job, and do some additional freelance work. So with all of these red flags that I've been thinking about throughout my freelance career, I've encountered a handful of communication behaviors, a handful of energy behaviors that I have identified of people who I personally don't enjoy working with. Now, I'm sure they have found other freelancers and other people who they work better with, but there are certain situations that are generally not favorable to freelancers. So to quickly summarize that from a less fantastical example is there are price seekers. To summarize, a price seeker is someone who is looking for the cheapest rate possible. Those are people who they're always going to try and talk you down on your work, get you down to the lowest price. The second is the know-it-all. The know-it-all is someone who thinks your job is easy. They basically think that they're an expert already and you're just there to push buttons, but you listener, are there to provide creative guidance, creative problem solving skills. There are certainly a lot of things that you bring to the table, and know-it-alls kind of throw that in the garbage and say, I know better. So they might as well just do the work themselves because they already know how to do it. But they're bringing you on for some weird reason. So then you have the indecisive client, the one who's never quite ready to start a project. They keep talking to you about these amazing ideas, but they can't actually get started. And typically a big sign of that is it's hard for them to commit to a scope of work where there's actually money involved. Then you have people who take a lot of time. So these are the people who are constantly asking you for meetings. They're very slow for feedback. They are very bad at missing deadlines when it comes to delivering client feedback on time. And then the last one is the perfectionists, the ones who will never let projects end. They are constantly nickel and diming it. They're constantly pixel peeping it because they just want it to be perfect. So, all that being said, we're going to break down each of these 5 types of red flags and what you can do to navigate that in today's episode. So starting from the top, the first one is the price seeker. And I like to think about these in sort of fantasy roles and fantasy archetypes. So we're going to call the price seeker the Goblin bargainer. The one who is always constantly trying to get the cheapest rate, the cheapest price for whatever you do. And honestly, it's pretty easy to spot these people because you'll share your rate, whatever that is, and then they'll come at you with a potentially lower rate. Now, I will add that I do think it is important for all freelancers to understand their burn rate, which is the minimum amount of money they can accept on a project before they start losing money. But all that being said, sometimes a rate does need to be negotiated. And the reason why I share this is there are certain industries or projects that may not actually be worth your preferred day rate to a client. Because let's be real, as artists, yeah, we would all love to make $1,000 a day, $800 a day, $2,000 a day, whatever you charge. But sometimes there's a project that may come across your plate where it's not quite that 800 or 600, but it might be a little bit higher than your burn rate, which would be nice. And it's a matter of setting expectations. So if a Goblin bargainer, a price seeker, does come to you and they have this project and you give them a quote and they come back with a super lowball offer where it is borderline disrespectful. Let's say, for example, you're like, I have a $2,000 project, and be like, I have $200. That is not going to be a good experience for anyone. So instead, the best thing to do with a Goblin bargainer is to refer them or just kindly decline. Just say no. And practicing your no muscle is going to be one of the most important skills as a freelancer because it will enable you to make space for the opportunities that will actually be worth your time, your energy, your effort, etc. But if that price seeker, Goblin seeker, does see a $2,000 price tag and be like, okay, we can't do 2K. That's too much for us. We have 1,000. That might be worth your time. And the reason why I say that is they're trying to meet you somewhere in the middle based on what they have, and maybe you could come back with 1,500 as another negotiation tactic. So the best way to spot a price seeker in general is when their counter offer or lowball offer is so low, it is borderline disrespectful. And in those situations, the best thing you can do is just say no, make space for the other opportunities that will happen in your life, or alternatively, just recommend them to other services. So, for example, I do personally use Fiverr on occasion for some projects, but I also do refer people out to Fiverr. I'm not a huge fan of Fiverr, but if we had to make a choice between the dirty word that begins in A and ends in I versus Fiverr, and you find a Fiverr artist who's actually pretty ethical, I'm going to choose the Fiverr option. So sometimes the price seeker and the bargain seeker, recommending other contractors, other freelancers, or Fiverr would be the best solution for them. So price seekers are pretty easy to see. So that brings us to the second one. The second big client red flag is the know-it-all. The person who thinks they know how to do your job, they think it's easy, and they don't fully understand the process. I kind of like to think about this as a min-maxing wizard or mage. You know, the mages and wizards who are constantly reading, who are well-educated, well-studied. They know pretty much everything, but they have a hard time with action. And one of the biggest negotiation tactics when it comes to freelancing is not just knowing and saying how to do the thing, but actually doing the thing, action and follow through. So the know-it-all might have a lot of talk, but they don't have a lot of walk, so to speak. Know-it-alls, the min-maxing wizard, the mage, you can imagine them, they're sitting in their mage tower, they're constantly reading tomes, knowing more about the process. And they talk like an expert. They speak very confidently about logo design or 3D animation or 3D sculpting, whatever they do. And the best thing to do with the know-it-all mages is ask questions. The questions is to almost mirror them, like agree with them in a way where you are empathizing with, like, yeah, this is super easy. So then when you get down to the nitty gritty of negotiating a rate, negotiating a price, you can confidently say, yeah, it's easy, we know how to do it, yeah, we can bang this out for a rate that is fair to you. And if they are, let's say, disagreeing with the rate, then they may come back with, but it's so easy. Why are you charging me such a high rate? And you're charging the know-it-all price. You're charging the wizard the price that's a high rate because they're having a hard time with action. Because you as a freelancer are able to bring more action to them. The know-it-all typically has a lot of confidence in thinking about the work, but not actually doing the work. So the pro tip to ask them, and I will say I did take an example of a roleplay from one of Chris Doe's content, is just ask. Like, Chris Doe suggested this, and it's actually worked for me when I found a handful of these clients. Just ask, so if it's so easy, why don't you do it yourself? And then typically the answer is, I don't have the time. Maybe their skill set actually doesn't quite match it there. So then when you come back with a rate, you can be like, well, we have the time. If we can make it happen for this budget. And then you leave it at that. So the know-it-all mages, they're a little hard to handle because they're typically going to come at it from a situation of maybe almost downplaying your work, but you need to just come at it with confidence that you have action to bring to the table, and you can do it for a certain rate that will make it worth their time and your time. With that, we also have the indecisive client. I like to think about this one as like the wandering spirit. If you've played games like World of Warcraft or Dungeons and Dragons, you'll typically find an aberration, a ghost, the wandering spirit that doesn't quite know how to release themselves from the world. And this type of client, the wandering spirit, the indecisive client, is never committing to a certain action. They're almost like haunting you. They're haunting you in a way that, like, you know you could make some cool stuff with them, but they're not willing to agree on a scope of work, agree on a budget, and no money is changing hands, and it just wastes your time. And it really sucks because you can do everything in your power to, like, encourage them, get them excited about it, but they just hem and haw about moving forward with making the work. And the best thing you can do here is one, just ask them to come back when you're ready to start the project. So I've had a handful of client situations like this where we're talking about a board game trailer, a Kickstarter video, but they're still not ready to share art, share logos, or maybe this is an illustration client where they keep thinking about like uh, surface level example, drawing their D&D character, but they don't even have a D&D character sheet yet. So it's like you don't even know how to get started. So the best thing to do in those situations with the indecisive client, the wandering spirit, is to give them the resources to think about getting started. So some content I've come across on how to be a better freelancer here just says ask them to come back when they're ready. But I've found that giving them the resources to get started and thinking about how to actually begin the creative process has been more useful. So, for example, let's say you have someone who you may want to do a short video. They may want you to do an illustration, whatever else. I do something that may be a little bit proactive. It does take me about 30 minutes, but it does create a lot of clarity with these clients, the wandering spirits, the indecisive, and that is to create a creative brief. So the creative brief I make is a 3 to 5 page deck. It's a mood board. Just make your client a mood board and be like, hey, I heard you. It sounds like this is what you're looking for. So when you're ready, if you think this creative brief looks good, we can have a chat about maybe developing this into a scope of work. And then you leave it at that. And I've found that this has actually been more helpful to my clients because while I know I'm doing a little bit of free work by giving them a creative brief that helps them gain clarity, some people charge this as a discovery. It takes me 15 to 20 minutes to rip some images from Pinterest, put it in a deck, and send it to them. And it just shows that that I'm listening and I'm trying to be there to help them and get them moving forward. And sure, they could go to another client after they have this, or they can go to another freelancer after they have this mood board. But great, I help them. And the way I see it is, if this indecisive client has an amazing project and they didn't work with me, I still gave them a good experience, and they might come back in the future. And that has happened to me in the past. So for the wandering spirit, for the indecisive client, I do recommend, one, asking them to come back when they're ready to start a project, but I follow it up with a deck or a short mood board, something to give them something so that they have more clarity on what they're looking for. Now, the fourth major client red flags are the ones who are extremely time consuming. They're overly booking you on meetings, slow feedback, missed deadlines, etc. I call those people time vampires. Unlike the vampire that we spoke about at the beginning of this episode, time vampires are constantly taking up so much of your time that you are actually making it very challenging, or they're making it very challenging to give you billable hours, because unfortunately as freelancers, us being in meetings means we're not doing the work, and us being in meetings are technically not billable hours, versus us actually doing the work is billable hours. So how do you manage this? With these clients, setting time limits, setting hard boundaries, and learning communication rules. And you don't always have to be like, we are only going to meet for 30 minutes, or you are only going to meet at these times. But setting gentle boundaries is typically a good way to start if you sense that someone might be a time vampire. If it does get really bad, then you do need to be a little bit stricter about your boundaries, but just say, hey, in these meetings, let's make sure we stay on task, we stay on point, we're talking about the creative work. And then, hey, just a couple of the things that I found with the time vampires: they don't know how to end a conversation, they tend to be a little talkative, which is, again, totally fine. It's awesome to build relationships, build friendships as freelancers, but I will say sometimes just say, hey, you know what, we're at like, once we're at like the 30-minute mark, I'll say, hey, by the way, I have to bounce in like 15 minutes to prep for another meeting, so let's make sure that we can get through the last whatever we need to talk about in the next 15 minutes. And setting that early makes it super easy to gently get out of a meeting. Now, the slow feedback part, or the missed deadlines part, that's a challenge because obviously other people are working on other big things and you don't know what's going on in someone else's life. So the slow feedback, the missed deadlines, it does make it harder to make sure that you can get the project done on time. And I'm going to come at this from the book Scarcity, where in the book Scarcity, it talks about how most people, when their time is scarce, when their resources are scarce, they tend to behave irrationally. So if you have a client who may be giving you slow feedback, missed deadlines, the best thing to do in those scenarios is not set boundaries. While it is important to set boundaries, instead of setting boundaries, you build in slack. You account for the potential slowed feedback or the slower deadline. So if your client is giving you a hard set deadline, just say, hey, based on our working history, I feel like we'll be able to get this project done at this date, which is later, because of our typical feedback cadence. And generally speaking, I have found that most clients are receptive to that kind of communication because effectively what you're communicating as a freelancer is, hey, look, I love your pace. I can match your pace if you want me to match your pace. I can also go faster, but I'm not going to lose sleep over that. And then when you have the slow feedback accounted for and the late deadlines accounted for, you also bill additional hours or additional rate accordingly. So if you have a potential project that's like 5K that you could get it done in 2 weeks, maybe you bill 5.4K instead, because getting that extra little cash flow, that extra little slack, that extra little wiggle room in your profit margin to account for the extra time you'll be booked on that project. The last major client red flag is the perfectionist. I like to think about this one as the feedback dragon, the one that's always breathing down feedback, breathing down fire because they're pixel peeping the work. They just are never, ever satisfied. They're constantly hoarding their treasure like a dragon would to get the most out of what they're paying for. They can't finish projects. They're constantly revising, etc. So the perfectionist, very similar to the time vampire. It's about setting clear boundaries, but instead of time as a boundary, you set phases as a boundary. So the phases could be specific milestones within a project. So I come from the video editing, video production realm. So we typically have a phase called R&D, or research and development, or research and discovery. And then after R&D, we have pre-production, then we have production, then we have post-production. So 4 distinct phases. If you want to include the 5th one, delivering all of the content to the client. So to account for the feedback dragon, there are specific phases, and each phase has up to 2 revisions for me, and typically the way I run my business. Sometimes I'll do more, like if there's a quick little note here and there. I generally try and be someone who is really good to work with, who makes sure I'm serving my clients in the best way possible. But it's important to stay firm. It's important to stay fair, but it's important to stay firm. So up to 2 revisions per major phase. Now, it is important to understand when a client is maybe worth allowing them to be a little bit of a perfectionist. Let's say they're a much more seasoned veteran in the industry. They're pushing you to push the work further to get the best work out of you. So you really have to understand what is the client actually trying to get out of you, because sometimes they are predatory. They just can't finish a project, but sometimes their feedback might actually make the work better. So what I always like to think about, whether it's working with a perfectionist or someone who's pretty normal, is just like, if what we're trying to change is going to make the work ultimately better and it's not going to be a huge sweeping change, maybe it's worth considering. But long story short, dealing with the perfectionist dragon, the feedback dragon, the one who can't ever finish a project, the best thing is to set very clear phases with limited revisions. I do up to 2. You could do 3. You could do however many. Also depends on the size of the project that you're doing. And it's important to stay firm but fair in all of those rounds of revisions and feedback. And lastly, I do want to end this podcast with the best kind of client. That is the one with whom there's mutual respect, there's mutual trust, and you can move projects forward and feel confident that everyone is doing amazing work together. So the good kind of monster, we call those people the value buyer. I'm just going to say it's a golden griffin, so to speak. The value buyer, they're typically buying based on how they value your work. And if they're talking to you, they probably value your work to a high degree. And they want high quality outcomes, and therefore they're willing to pay for it, which is amazing. That's the best sign. It's hard to find these clients, but if you find a golden griffin, keep it for as long as possible. Now, when it comes to finding a golden griffin, there's a couple of things to look out for. First is that there's little to no resistance in price. There might be a little bit, and if your client always says yes straight out of the gate, then you might be charging a little too low. So it's always understanding the value that you're bringing to them, and helping them understand like what is involved in making the work. So little to no resistance in price is one, a good sign of a golden griffin. Two, they value your expertise. You're coming to them with a very specific skill set, and they appreciate and respect that, and they give you the time and resources to do that work. Now, a golden griffin is typically someone with whom you don't have to oversell yourself. So the overselling comes from a place of insecurity where you feel like you need to say your work is a certain amount. And a golden griffin, they already value your work, and that's why they're talking to you. If you are imagining getting yourself into maybe a job interviewing situation, typically you're in the job interview because they are valuing what you can bring to the table already. Now, one of the things that I do typically adhere by when it comes to my life is I typically buy things once, and I personally buy the more expensive thing most of the time, because if you buy cheap, you buy twice, because you're going to buy the cheap thing, you get really, really mad, and then you're going to go buy the thing that you actually wanted. And the type of people you're looking for are the people who have that mindset. I don't want to buy cheap and buy twice. I just want to buy it once and never be done with it. So the golden griffin does go both ways. You need to be able to deliver. But if you can find a client with whom you have an amazing working relationship, they love your work, they respect the effort and energy that you put in, and vice versa, that's going to be an amazing client relationship. So all that being said, those are the major client red flags that I have seen as a freelancer, and with my work in the board game space, doing entertainment product videos, little commercials, and Kickstarter videos here and there, those are the things that I look out for. I look out for the price seekers, the people who are trying to get the lowest price. Those are the goblin bargainers. I look out for the know-it-alls, the people who think they know better than I do, the theoretical archmage, whatever you want to call it, who are just constantly studying but actually never doing the work. The indecisive client, the wandering spirit, the ones who are never willing to get a project started. The time vampires, the ones that take up so much of your time. And the perfectionist dragons, the ones who will never ever let a project end. And really, we're just trying to find a couple golden griffins so we can make an amazing freelance lifestyle for us. So thank you so much for listening to the Creative Adventure Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please let me know in the comments section down below. Questions, comments, concerns, whatever else, that would be super appreciated over some sort of review on your podcaster of choice. It does let me know that I'm making content that is valuable to you, and it helps me modify how I release this content so I can be a better freelance helper to you. I guess what would that be? A side quest, or perhaps I am the NPC to your story. So thank you very much, and let's end today with a dice roll, as always. We've just been on a kick of this Metal Dragon D20, and we're going to give it a roll, see how our next freelance project is going to go. I have some very potential exciting news next week, so I'm just going to manifest that. Let's go. Let's see. How is freelancing going to go for us? That's an 18. We're feeling good today. Thank you so much for listening to the Creative Adventure Podcast, an artist guide to modern freelancing. And until next time, may the freelance dice forever roll in your favor. Take care.